Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. The Toronto Star is currently doing a series of sorts, all about the ways in which Doug Ford has completely botched the pandemic response and been very open to corruption. Pretty much all of these are behind paywalls, so that's a check mark against the Toronto Star there, because hey, if you want people who are, generally voting for Ford, they're probably not also the same people that are going to want to pay for your subscription fee. But I digress. Let's start with the first piece in this trilogy of sorts that they have. So it's come to light that several of Doug Ford's key pandemic decisions were swayed by business interests, according to a Toronto Star analysis. And so if you're wondering why so many of the restrictions during the various stages and lockdowns that we had seemed very arbitrary, this is why. As a lot of people remember, we went into one of our lockdowns on Boxing Day, right in the middle of one of the biggest shopping seasons of the year here in Canada. And Doug Ford looked like, oh geez, this is terrible. But the cases were just skyrocketing at that point and we needed to get a handle on them. But curiously, there were a lot of exemptions, especially for the big business and discount stores for them to stay open. And so a lot of small businesses were absolutely outraged, and understandably so. The healthcare and medical profession was also outraged, saying, what are you doing? You're still allowing in-person shopping. Like, what? The numbers are rising. What are you doing? Turns out, lobbyists lobbied the government to ensure that these businesses could be open. According to the article, it's too dramatic to use the word criminal for this, but that is so irresponsible. That is irresponsible, said Colin Furness, an infection control epidemiologist at the Dalla School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. It was bad health policy, in other words. It also alienated Ford's most beloved constituency. That's the moment when this turned into anger, said Dan Kelly, the president and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Anger at the Ford government, anger at Doug Ford personally. And that has lasted. And that's true. A lot of people have understandably been very upset at Ford because, oh, hey, we thought you were all about small business. And apparently he really wasn't. And we'll get to that. For public health experts, the big box carve-out was inexplicable on a policy level, but it was something else too, a bright peak in a pattern that has quietly shaped Ontario's pandemic response. At crucial points, large and small, since Ontario first declared a state of emergency in March of 2020, the government has made decisions that align with the interests of lobbyists, many of whom have close ties to the Premier, his party, or both, and the businesses they represent. Those decisions have often favored certain sectors over others and have, at key moments in the pandemic, gone against public health advice, delaying or fracturing lockdowns. So yeah, there we have it. Just full actual proof of how, all of us thinking at the time, geez, what is this? Like, yes, such a lockdown, right? Hell, I even made a video about that. It was so egregious and laughable in terms of what a lockdown was in this province that, of course, case numbers just continued and thousands died that didn't need to die. All because of business interests. We put money over people and lives. The article continues to go on, but I'm only going to use a little bit more of it. But you should definitely try and find a way to read this article. It is worth your time. The Star's reporting suggests that there's more to the story. Using provincial records, the Toronto Star created a database of all registered lobbying activity at the end of the second wave in Ontario. A Star analysis of that data, as well as interviews with dozens of lobbyists, political, industry, and medical insiders, shows that, again and again during COVID, lobbyists were able to deliver for their clients in industries like film, construction, and long-term care in ways that sometimes warped the COVID fight. They pushed for legal indemnities that were provided, contracts that were signed, and lockdown exemptions like the big box carve-out that were granted. And yeah, and we also just have, all of us Ontarians, so much anecdotal evidence of this. Oh yeah, we're such essential workers working at, a Cinnabon in a mall or whatever it was, right? It was ridiculous what was considered essential. And again, several companies managed to get exemptions. Purelator got an exemption for its new massive facility that they're building in the Premier's home riding. The film and television industry said, oh, look, we can't film with, a restriction on 10 people. We need at least 50 people. They got that exemption. Exemption after exemption was given left, right, and center. And that's part of why Ontario's lockdowns have been pretty pathetic and laughable in the past, and it's also why Ontario had some of the worst numbers and why it took us forever to actually climb out of those numbers, resulting in thousands of illnesses and deaths that didn't need to happen. Doug Ford and lobbyists have actual literal blood on their hands. Our government literally tried to align itself with business interests rather than public health interests, even though they govern at the pleasure of the public that they have condemned to suffer lockdown after lockdown and illness after illness. And I mentioned Purelator earlier, but there's also an interesting story involving DHL. DHL Express Canada hired longtime PC insiders Carly Lewis and Leslie Noble to lobby on its behalf in April 2020. Their goal was to make sure work would continue on DHL's new $100 million hub at the Hamilton Airport. Last fall, Lewis left the lobbying business. She's now Health Minister Christine Elliott's Director of Communications. She did not reply to a request for comment from the Toronto Star. Oh, and remember how I talked about a while ago that massive COVID outbreak at an Amazon facility in Brampton and went on a rant about that and several other things? There's now more to that story. On March 12, 2021, Peel's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Lawrence Lowe, ordered an Amazon warehouse in Brampton closed due to a COVID outbreak. Within a week of that date, on or after March 6, 2021, a new group of lobbyists, all from Rubicon Strategies, a firm co-owned by Ford's campaign manager and top political advisor Corey Tenneke, began advocating for Amazon in Ontario. Among Rubicon's goals for Amazon, to consult on vaccine rollout in the province, and on the night Lowe ordered Amazon closed, a provincial official called him to personally offer 5,000 COVID vaccines. Lowe declined the offer. And there are more and more examples in this one article. One article out of 3, and I haven't read the rest, but I also want to go off a little bit on a tangent about long-term care for a second, because what happened there was entirely avoidable, and it should be the death knell of capitalism, but it won't be because we don't care enough about dead old people, even though that's going to be us in the future. Long-term care, this for-profit care, cut so many corners, and so it became the outbreak of so many COVID hotspots that resulted in hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths of seniors, grandmas and grandpas condemned to die for the almighty dollar. And among the most egregious of these is run by the former Premier of Ontario, Mike Harris, who was awarded Ontario's highest civic honor just a little while ago by our current Conservative Premier. These people are callous crooks. Doug Ford may talk a good talk about folks and for the little guy. He's clearly not in favor of that. That should be absolutely clear. And the business interests, which conservatives love to slavishly devote themselves to, has resulted in worse pandemic numbers and longer lockdowns and just a worse situation overall. And yet so many people continue to support this system and this party that directly enables it to kill our grandparents. And no, that is not hyperbole, because what happened in long-term care, as I pointed out in yet another different video, was so horrifying that military had to be brought in to help deal with the crisis. And they were so horrified that the military needed to bring in PTSD consultants. This party is villainous. Our big businesses are callous cowards who see only profit and not the very people that they rely on to function and service as businesses. Because under a capitalist system, all you care about is shareholders and keeping the shareholders happy, which is why so many of these businesses happily took the emergency wage subsidy and then just did stock buybacks and gave their executives bonuses for a job well done. We have literal cartoon villains governing this province and being in charge of many businesses. And they aren't even hiding it. Enough is enough. Doug Ford needs to go, and all these companies need to be punished and need to repay the money that they got, which was our tax dollars, by the way. They need to repay that to us, and then they also need to be taxed, given all the massive profits that they have reaped while the rest of us have continued to suffer and evictions continue. And They clear out homeless people from camps where they have nowhere else to go because housing is now just another hot commodity that is being used for pension funds and stuff. This is literally a nightmare scenario, and we all recognize it, and we all actually know how to fix it, and yet we don't actively work towards that goal, and that is what's bothering me today.